Hey guys, Loman02. Actually have in front of me right now is a cube deck for the Modern Cube on MTGO, and I believe it's going to be on until the 22nd of March. So unfortunately, I was not rolling camera when I drafted this cube deck in the Modern Cube, but I wanted to actually quickly go through it. And actually, I wish I had been. Unfortunately, I had other things going on at the time, and didn't have a chance to talk through all of my plays because I think these videos lose a lot of value when you talk about a cube deck and don't watch the actual draft itself. But for a note, we did first pick a Liliana of the Veil in the pack with it. There were several other cards. I believe blue. It was a double blue card. I believe it was a Vendilion Click, as well as a good Gideon, the 5-mana Gideon that was in the pack. I chose the Liliana of the Veil. I thought out of those cards, it left the most open. Vendilion Click, obviously, double casting requirements, generally going to be in a control style deck. Could be in a tempo style deck, but I don't think blue tempo is viable most of the time. Although we did end up picking up some cards that make it viable, such as like the Kira and the Dungeon Geists and Chasm Skulker to a much lesser extent. I guess Phantasmal Bear too. But we ended up picking up the Liliana first because we also figured that black would be underdrafted with the exception of its removal. So my thinking in that had been is that I could hedge bet, and if I had to go into like mono black devotion, I could, which I think is a more viable deck than blue devotion. And or I could go into like blue black, blue or black red, or Grixis color pie, or really any other color combination. Rock, although I don't really tend to like rock in. For those of you that may not know, it's a green red or green black color combination. I don't tend to like those color combos in the cube, especially in Modern Cube where the reanimation effects are much less. If you can get an early recurring nightmare, I think that deck can be good. But we ended up having a very strong draft. As you can tell, just looking at our board, we were definitely in the right colors from early on. And what really sunk it for me is no pun intended, finding this Sunken Hollow, which had been in my pack one with the Liliana of the Veil wheeling back towards me. So just as a note before we jump into some of the matches, which I'll cover briefly, when you do cube draft, I highly recommend that you take lands highly. Not as relevant, I think, in the modern cube as it is in the legacy cube. I think the further you get back into eternal formats, the more flexibility you want to have in mana bases because the cards all tend to be on power parity. As you can tell from just looking through our board, there's cards like Jinx Choker, which is a viable card. You could play it, but it's certainly not as powerful as a card like Liliana of the Veil. And definitely all sixes are not equal. You see a Soren Markov, Vice, Wormcoil Engine, or Dragonlord Silumgar. So I think if you were to look at, less eternal formats, you generally want to, bet on the side of power level over fixing when you're drafting or cubing those style of decks. But when you're cubing older formats, I think fixing takes on much more relevance, as is artifact or fast mana, because of the availability of greater volume of lands over time. Keep in mind this is the modern cube, so we don't have Underground Sea in this format. The ability to fix becomes a lot more vast, and the power level of cards becomes a lot more vast. So the ability to fix and just randomly get something that's great, in a separate color, becomes a lot more viable. So if you're taking early pick mana, it just frees up what you're able to take later. And really, if you're looking at 6 drops in the Legacy or Vintage Cube, they're all pretty darn good. If you're casting them, if you're casting a 6 drop and it's staying around, you're probably winning. Whereas I think in like the Modern Cube, maybe not as much. You have like the Soren Markovs of the world, which I guess is okay in like a devotion deck, but even then, like I kind of want my 6 drop to do more than 2 damage and gain me 2 life when the turn it comes into play. And changing an opponent's life total to 10 at the point in time at which you have 6 mana seems kind of meh to me. It's fine in Commander, I suppose. In the Mindslaver one, that's pretty far off. So it is a +2 ability though. So I guess it's not that far off, but I don't know. I don't tend to think that this thing's going to stick around on turn 7 of your opponents or turn 6 of your opponents. So this is the deck. Had some pretty strong sideboard options. I also look at Duress. I didn't play it main, although I did board it quite often. Disfigure, good against weenies and aggro or decks with a lot of mana critters. Brain Maggot, good board card. Anything that can hit the hand, especially if you're playing against something that has a strong combo in it, and or is a control deck and its cards are independently relevant. And what I mean by that is, you look at like Red Deck Wins, like most of its cards do the same thing. Outside of cards like Outpost Siege, they all do a lot of damage for very little mana and die very easily or go away instantly. Whereas when you look at Control, like there are only so many Wraths of Gods, in the cube or that are even viable for playing in a singleton format. So when you look at Control, like your ability to disrupt their hand has much more relevance than it does against a deck like Red Deck Wins. And that's when you're going after like point target removal. If you're using like card advantage cards like Hymn to Turak, they're good against everyone. Because Red Deck Wins, I think you have to look at it as a combo deck, and if you're knocking cards out of their hands, that's essentially, think of it as less storm count. Stratus Dancer, never boarded this one in, but strong board card nonetheless. As you can see, we have 6 creatures in deck, so Kira didn't really make sense to play main. Hypnotic Spectre, I actually liked less than the 1 mana discard capabilities. Plus, I had Liliana in the 3 spot for discard. But both Hypnotic Spectre and Liliana's Spectre actually became relevant in the last game we played, which was against a 4 to 5. I think a 4 color. It was a 4 color deck that was like pretty much mono Planeswalkers, and our ability to disrupt their capability to deploy their mana base over time, as well as keep relevant cards in their deck or in their hand, was very important. So these cards came in then. Jinx Choker, can play it. Probably never would. Never really played the Control Mirror. I think this card is playable in the Control Mirror, and I may have boarded it in. It is 4 mana, a lot of damage, but if I was playing against like blue-white with this deck, which I did not, I could have boarded this card in because I think it's very strong in that matchup. Dungeon Geist, I actually did board this in, I believe, once. It's a fine card. Cryptcast, I'm not really doing anything huge with my mana, outside of like, my 6 drops and my Black Sun of Zenith, which kills this thing anyways. So I didn't play it. I'm just not a big mana deck. Never brought this card in either. And mostly it's because I'm probably never going to emerge it unless I emerge it for like 1 less mana than it's actually hard cast off a Bitter Blossom token. So that's the board. Did not play Mutavault either. That's the board right there, guys. And we'll go ahead and go into the matches real quick so you can kind of see how it did. It ended up doing pretty well for me. And it was a very fun deck. I was glad to get to draft this thing. I had not heard good things about the Modern Cube, but I definitely had a good time. So, here we go. So let's cover the initial keep. Initial keep is very land heavy. We have a Creeping Tar Pit, though, which is a good man land. I also have a Liliana. I don't expect to have threats early with this deck, so I just need to stay alive. I also have Far and Away, which is a relatively strong card. I mean, it's very mana intensive if you use it for its full value. I also have a Hero's Downfall, which I know I'll be able to cast on turn 3 if things are not looking favorably for Liliana. So we'll go ahead and play it out. I believe we drop our Creeping Tar Pit as we are on the draw for this one. Draw a strong one there in Jace, Architect of Thought. Keep in mind, Jace, Mind Sculptor is not available in Modern. It is a banned card in Modern. All right, we play on our additional swamp at this point, and we see a Bygone Bishop. So here's my thinking process. I don't do this here, actually. I consider it, which is definitely a Mototail and was a poor play on my part to actually give this Mototail. What I debated on doing is actually farring this creature to put it back in his hand and force him to recast it the next turn. Well, my consideration has to be is I can remove it with Liliana, but at the same time, if I play my Liliana out and he has the additional forest, he'll be able to, or green producing land, he'll be able to attack, or he or she will be able to attack with their Stirring Wildwood into the Liliana and kill it. I don't go for this because I think I can get better advantage out of the Far and Away later on. Oop. So I go ahead and untap and take the turn back. Negate, not bad. If he or she has Planeswalkers, we're pretty sure we'll be able to get them. We see the forest, so our worst is actualized. However, here's what you have to think here. Yes, we've lost our Liliana, but we've acquired a 1-for-1 exchange with our Liliana, and we've taken up an entire turn of our opponent's mana production. So these mana lands are great. Don't get me wrong, I would never say they're bad. But I like them. I tend to like them more when they are being used as game closers, as opposed to an exchanger of 1 card. So I've taken up a whole turn's worth of mana, which is a huge tempo loss to my opponent, and I've gotten a card out of him. So we've maintained card parity at this point. Well, I am up 1 because I'm on the draw, but effectively, he's not developed his board at this point. So we'll go ahead and play it out. He plays an additional man land, which has me a little concerned because Raging Ravine, if unanswered, can get size huge. Now, I do have the Far and Away in hand. I also have the Hero's Downfall here. I've been fortunate to draw the Cryptic Command, and I intend on pretty much Cryptic Commanding anything that he casts. This is not a great card, but I get rid of it just so I can draw into more cards, draw an additional counter. I'm really just looking for lands here. So I'm at 5 lands. I just leave up my counter magic and my Hero's Downfall. Opponent tries to play around counter magic here by just attacking it with one of their man lands. Although I think that may be a dubious proposition. So of note, there actually are a decent amount of counter spells in the Modern Cube. At least I think, or I saw many of them. So he's playing around that, but he's also exposing a threat that is extremely resilient to most removal, to an open set of 5, black and blue mana at this point. So we go ahead and oblige after the creature is tapped and attacking, so he can't produce mana with it, and Hero's Downfall this card. Again, he or she activates the Raging Ravine. We wait till it's tapped so they cannot produce mana, and then we away the creature and go for an Anticipate end step. I believe just taking one of the lands, but we could have grabbed the Slaughter Pact here if Moto will cooperate. This is obviously a recording of the match. Well, guys, I'm going to go on a quick pause and see if Moto... Alright, guys, we're back. Unfortunately, Moto crashed. We did pick up the Slaughter Pact out of those 3 cards that were previously shown, which was Island, and Slaughter Pact. And we will allow it to continue. Alright, we draw Inquisition. I believe we go for the Inquisition, and we end up taking the Journey to Nowhere. Because we are a very threat-light deck, the Volt Charge is going to do very little against our creatures, but we also don't want to play... one of our 6 creatures and just have it get Journey to Nowhere because we really can't deal with a Journey to Nowhere once it's resolved. I also don't want to waste a negate or a dissolve on it. I will negate or dissolve the Chandra all day long. Opponent wisely plays around the counter magic. We go ahead and play out our Bitter Blossom here because it's a threat that's extremely resilient and presents lethal over enough time. I also draw the Bloodgift Demon, but I don't believe I play that out there because what I don't want to do is just run into a Chandra and have the Chandra, blow up my Bloodgift Demon for 4. I do have a Liliana at this point, though, and Negate still available to me. So when we see the opponent cast out the Quarantine Field, we go ahead and negate it here. And we leave Liliana in play, which Liliana plus Bitter Blossom are 2 threats that need to be dealt with. The Liliana probably more rapidly than the Bitter Blossom. Bitter Blossom can be raced. Liliana is tough to race when you're on an open board. We leave the Silumgar on top and kind of lament that we just countered his Planeswalker because his Planeswalker his or her Planeswalker would be very beneficial to us as well. Play out the Jace. Go ahead and -1 to all the creatures on the next turn. Plays out a Voice of Resurgence. Still has 1 card in hand. Attacks with the Nest Invader, which is a questionable play here because it is going to be a 1/2. We block pretty favorably. We lose 0 cards for his 1 card. We end up taking the larger pile here. We really don't need the 6/6 lifelinker. We steal the Voice of Resurgence. And at this point in time, the opponent concedes, which makes sense. They're on 1 card. They know what it is. I do not. And the game is pretty much over at this point. So we'll go to the next game, which we played against player Dudette. And this is a great hand. So we have a turn 1 Creeping Tar Pit into Bitter Blossom and or Serum Visions. Don't like seeing the Llanowar Elves because that generally means that they're going to have a turn 3 play on turn 2, which I really can't handle with this hand right now. Draw a Worm Coil, not a great draw. I really only need one of my 2/6 drops. It's a fine card, don't get me wrong. Here we end up playing out the Bitter Blossom after we see him attack with the Llanowar Elves, which means to me probably kept a very mana-rich hand, but very threat-light. I just opt to leave up my Dissolve just in case he or she top decks a 5-mana Planeswalker or just a large creature threat, as opposed to disfiguring there. So really right now what I'm trying to do is draw into more lands, because I feel like if this hand can draw into more lands, I can't lose. However, I will remove this. So when he activates his man land, I double block, disfigure, lose one of my Fairy Rogues, and kill his land. So we could opt to play the Inquisition here, but for the same reason, we leave up the Dissolve. We're just, like I said, trying to hit lands here so we can get Cryptic Command online and then start getting our more robust threats into play. We do counter this because this is a card advantage engine, although at this point they have not shown a lot of threats. Now, interesting note here, and I'll pause it for just a second. What we actually saw there, and Moto was going too fast for you to see it, is when we dissolved, we actually scried a Liliana of the Veil to the bottom of the deck. The reason we did that is because we want lands at this point, and it actually ends up working out because we do hit our swamp off of that, so on the next draw. That may seem like a questionable play to some folks. Liliana is a great card, but at this point in time, I just want to employ my threats I have in hand. Like, the opponent has pretty much shown to me that the 3 cards they have in hand are non-cards. The cards I have in hand are all gas. Maybe with the exception of, like, the Serum Visions. But I don't think I have any bad card, including Serum Visions. I think that's a good card, but I don't think I have any bad cards in hand that I really need to discard right now. And I feel like for them, they're knocking their top deck just to hit threats. I have threats. I just need to hit land, and my probability of hitting land is likely higher than theirs is of hitting, threats that I cannot deal with. That's kind of why we play the game the way we have. We get in there with our 2 1/1s, just start plinking away. That's what Bitter Blossom does. Just develops incremental value. We go ahead and Mystic Confluence, or correction, Cryptic Command this, trying to draw into more land. Hit a Hero's Downfall, which is also a fine card. We end up missing, and we set it up with Serum Vision such that we can draw land on the following turn. We've missed quite prolifically. This is a 17-land deck. We get a Wrath of God. So this is an interesting play out of the opponent. I guess they just felt like they needed to buy more tempo, more time, but they essentially 2 for 0 themselves there. So they killed none of my cards. They took none of my cards away from me, and they got rid of their own Llanowar Elves, plus got rid of a very powerful card, Wrath of God, which I think, as you'll see later on in the game, as this game develops, ends up being pretty bad for them. So we end up playing out the Bloodgift Demon. It gets Journey to Nowhere. It's fine. Plays out the Chandra. We get plinked for 2. The opponent at this point in time is trying to use our own Bitter Blossom to race us with, because the Bitter Blossom is not going to rapidly kill the Chandra Torch of Defiance. However, we do have answers to Chandra, but what we opt to do here is actually kind of interesting. So, as opposed to playing out the Hero's Downfall, we actually take it because we can actually win very fast with this. Now, this is a risky play, but I make the assumption that I don't have anything relevant in hand when I do it because they've haven't played anything. I do cast this card out to put the Voice of Resurgence back in hand, and then get it with the Inquisition of Kozilek, because that card is a card disadvantage engine if you don't deal with it in the right way. Opponents at 6, draws nothing for their turn, and we end up winning the game, whether by Chandra Emblem next turn or just through attacks. We have lethal. So that was the first game, a fairly interesting game, and I think the deck definitely showed itself to be pretty good. The next game we play is against player Ozeal, 1984, or 1984. So, for the keep, he is on the play. See a white land, which leads me to believe he's probably either extremely controlling or very aggressive, but if he's a control deck, he is more than likely, blue-white, and blue-white control decks will tend to play islands first because there are many cheaper cards that allow you to fix draw. So I assume he's an aggressive deck. I play out the Cryptologist, which I assume is not going to be great, and confirmed. So we know at this point in time the opponent is on a very aggressive deck. They have a Cloistered Youth, which is essentially a 3/3 that does 1 damage to you at the end of turn. I kind of treat it as a much worse version of Serendipity. We do have the Enclave of Cryptologist out, though. We do opt to level it up this turn, because we kind of want to force his hand to remove it and acquire some card advantage off of it. Well, it's card parity, but I want him to use removal spells against my actual Enclave Cryptologist, because my intent is actually to block here with it, because I don't think the card's going to be great in this matchup. So it dies to the Magma Jet. We end up ditching our Anticipate and keeping a new land, as well as Consuming Vapors. So what we're setting up here is a turn where we can kill one thing and then establish or have Consuming Vapors kill another thing, and gain a bunch of life, because we're getting our head beat in right now. What we end up doing is Slaughter Pacting the Zergo Bellstriker, the Ironclaw Orcs, for lack of better terms. We gain the 3 life off of the Cloistered Youth, which is a 3/3 at that point. Pay for our Slaughter Pact, and then gain a 9 additional life off of the Gold Knight Castigator, which is an interesting card to me. I do get Brimstone Volley back down for 5, so, obviously not quite as good. He plays on a 1/1 Stormblood. I think he needed to wait on that, but maybe he was getting nervous that he wasn't going to have time. I kill it with a Liliana the Last Hope, and I feel like the world is our oyster at this point. We can remove this thing at the end step, and set up a Cryptic Command the following turn, and from there I don't really feel like I can lose. With Cryptic Command Jace in hand, it's a pretty commanding position, and a Liliana that's just slowly ticking up, and he's obviously on nothing much. Sphere of Heliod, I'm fine with that. I'm not going to counter it. I'm really only going to counter permanent threats or, possibly. I won't counter cards that just damage Liliana. I will counter a card that would kill her. So I think she is my means to victory. I do counter this because I need a little more time to get the Liliana to ultimate. Even though I do not think that card is phenomenal. It gets better with a Sphere of Heliod in play. He or she doesn't even bother splitting the pile. And they just concede after that. I guess they knew the writing was on the wall. I probably had them unless they had a haster that could kill the Liliana the next turn. So we go to game 2, which I believe we actually lose this one. And this is our keep. So this is a questionable keep, but the reason I keep it is because if I hit an island, my Jace I think is going to be good against his or her deck. I also have a Disfigure, which is just good early interaction against like the Zergos and the Cloistered Youths of the world. I go ahead and Serum Visions here, and one of the interesting boarding things, I actually took the Silumgar out and put Soren Markov in. And I opt to keep him here because I figure most of their creatures are going to be small, and if I'm exchanging cards, I'm getting cards from the opponent for free, as well as gaining 2 life every time. I figure that's going to be pretty good. I think our choice to include Soren Markov actually bites us, though, but I kind of wanted to try my theory out on it here. And, what ends up happening is we probably should have put those cards on the bottom. We end up keeping them because we need the additional black mana to cast the Soren Markov, and I want to try Soren Markov on himself. So we see a Hell Rider get played, take 4 here. Not even remotely as good. We continue to hit swamps and do not hit our blue mana, which is detrimental to us here. It may have meant that we could have won the game, but as you'll see, it was not meant to be. So we hit our blue mana finally. After getting plinked twice by the Hell Rider, we go ahead and shrink the Hell Rider. See a Chandra Torch of Defiance, which is a beating. He does 1 to the Jace, but attacks us still for the damage. I believe we end up keeping the Anticipate here because we don't really need more land. We put on our 6-drop, the Wormcoil Engine, which I kind of figure at this point he probably has a way to kill us. So we take 1 down to 7, take 4 down to 3, and we get Brimstone Volley to death. Another interesting play that we could have done is we could have just used the Black Sun Zenith to kill the Hell Rider. A couple turns prior. I kind of wanted to get multiple for 1 card advantage out of it, so maybe I was greedy in making that line of play. If we had lived for another turn, I think it would have been pretty close to impossible for us to lose, though. If we get to snap off 1 attack with the Wormcoil Engine and get a Soren Markov online, I think that's probably game. But, as you can see, we drew way too many lands, but it comes back to how we utilize our Serum Visions in an attempt to try to use Soren Markov, and it could have just been wrong. And I believe I reboard him out, if I'm not mistaken, for Game 3, because I saw the Chandra. I figured his Boros deck was just more aggressive and did not have Planeswalker threats, which is full of little 1, 2, and 3 mana creature cards, like this right here. So we go ahead and play on our Liliana. We force him to sacrifice it. By the way, pretty solid hand on our side. We have our lands. We force everyone to discard. We actually discard the Bitter Blossom here, which I think is a curious play because it could actually be fine, I think. That's obviously not good for us. The Consuming Vapors comes off, and we hit nothing. We'll go ahead and Thoughtseize here. Hit their Stormblood Berserker. So they have a Banefire and Exquisite Firecraft, both of which can be uncounterable given the right conditions. Banefire if you pay more than 5 in the X of its casting, and the Exquisite Firecraft once he has 2 other sorceries in the graveyard for spell mastery. Right now he does not for the Exquisite Firecraft, so we could counter that if we wanted to, but what I'm really interested in doing is countering his permanent damage threats. Draw the Disfigure, so we're not drawing extremely well. We do need a win con or something that can force him to start overextending. We don't really have an easy time finding it, so we end up firing up the Creeping Tar Pit and start to plink away at him and leave up the Negate. Okay, so this is a strong card, but I waited. I think I was pretty patient about waiting until I could negate any non-creature spell. Creature spells I really can only deal with through the Disfigure, or I can clone it at this point with the Phantasmal Image. But what I'm really nervous about is not the Thriving Grubs of the world, but the what is this card called? The Sarkin, the Dragon Speakers of the world. Outpost Siege obviously puts me on a time hack. I need to start hurrying up because they're going to be gaining an additional card every turn. I end up keeping the 2 pile. I think it's just stronger. Although, I'm not in a position where I can really sit back and just counter spells, because eventually they're going to outcard me. I do counter this. It's just not a threat I can leave in play. I believe I keep the Liliana. Exquisite Fire crafts away my Jace. I end up firing up, or correction, I put the Liliana at the bottom. I fire up the Creeping Tarp because it's not fast enough. He or she will just burn it out. What I wanted to get was like a 6-drop, one of my 2 6-drops. We see a Phyrexian Revoker. Go ahead and just counter this. That could be wrong. I don't think it's any better or worse than that card, though that card is, on its own, does nothing. It's just a 2-2. We'll go ahead and fire her up, and now we have 6 power worth of threats in play, so we're kind of just trying to down-tempo the opponent really rapidly. This one interesting thing this deck can do is actually play to tempo. Here, we draw very strong on the Wormcoil Engine, which is actually what we're looking for. We put the Liliana on the bottom. A card like it, either this or the Silumgar. We clone it because if he wants to plink it with the Chandra, he can kill the cloned copy of the Wormcoil Engine, but it'll make 2 3/3s. We kind of figure he has it here because he hasn't conceded yet, and we had lethal on board. But we have to, I think, still oblige and force him to show us the Magma Jet, which he uses to kill our Creeping Tar Pit. We attack in. He's forced to block at this point. We're at 30 life, so I don't think there's much his deck can do. We do know he has a Banefire in hand, and he's going to cast it here to kill the Geist and free up his card. We end up taking the Serum Visions, because what we're looking for is a card exactly like that, but we end up finding it. So we away and far him, and that leaves him with 1 less blocker than he'll need, because he'll likely sacrifice his Henweir Militia, but his Kargan Dragonlord will no longer be capable of blocking, and the Isamaru cannot block out 2 6/6 Wormcoil Engines, one of which is lethal at this point. So that was the game, and we'll go to the last and final game we played with our blue-black control deck. All right, so game 1, and this is an interesting game. So what the opponent ends up being on, and you'll see here relatively soon, is essentially a mono-greedy Planeswalker deck. So what we saw in the opponent's hand was 1 creature that he was capable of casting, and 2 Planeswalkers, Solemn Simulacrum, and 3 lands. So, I'm thinking, all right, well, the opponent's going to have to get lucky on their top deck to draw the land they need to do this. And what I need to look to set up is a way to counter the Solemn Simulacrum so he cannot fix mana. I get a Liliana off of the Anticipate and start ripping apart the opponent's hand. At the same time, I have not, developed, my board to repleteness yet, so I do kind of run the risk of depriving myself of needed cards as well. But I think my mana is a lot simpler, and I think it's the right call to deprive them of resources. Every land they discard is more vitally important to them than it is to me. So I ended up casting the Consuming Vapors because I'm going to make them discard again, even though it provides absolutely 0 value this turn. He's obviously drawn a Chandra Nalar because we know he's discarded the Sorin Grim Nemesis. We start plinking on the Chandra Nalar and kind of hoping to hit our top deck and find something. We have a Siege Rhino come down, which is, fine. We lose some life. We make him sacrifice it, draw our 2 cards, essentially, or get our 1 card, which is much better than the 2 lands. We don't really want lands at this point. We draw a land. We go ahead at this point and use the Cryptic Command to flip the Chandra and draw an additional card, hoping to draw, something we can play. We don't. We draw a Slaughter Pact. Opponent wisely plays around the Liliana. And we just continue to plink away. We do draw finally a Bloodgift Demon, which is a good draw here. But unfortunately, opponent draws a Sarkhan Dragon Speaker, which gets rid of my creature threat. I force the opponent to take either Planeswalkers or lands. They keep lands, which means they're knocking their top deck, and I have a Far Away. Well, opponent draws very optimally and draws a threat that they needed, which is their Wormcoil Engine, which I really can't deal with here. I opt to take the hit 1 turn, thinking it may be wise, but unfortunately, and if I know what the opponent had in hand, which they play this very, very weird. So they play their Chandra out at post-combat, which is very weird to me. It's wrong. but I probably wouldn't have taken this hit if I knew they had a Chandra Flamecaller. They did not know I had a far away, so it makes it a very odd play, because if they assume I have counter magic, I think they just jam it anyways, because if it resolves, they're probably going to kill me. They draw Cultivate for that turn. I put a Bitter Blossom token into play, and I know I'm dead because I can't get rid of my own Bitter Blossom, and I'm on 1 life, which means I will die next turn and have no ability to remove their 22 life. So interestingly played, and you know, and albeit like we got a little unlucky there at the end. The opponent got very lucky and hit 2 optimals right in a row off their top deck on 0 cards, which happens. All right, so this is interesting. I don't know if you saw the initial hand, but I guess we could go back, but I'll just tell you. So there are 2 lands in their hand. It is this Vivid Grove and a Forest. The remainder of their cards are 4 to 6 drops, with the exception of the Sylvan Caryatid and the Cultivate. So I did board in I boarded in all of my discard in this matchup because I think their mana base is extremely greedy, and I think I can beat them on their mana base and by taking away singularly relevant cards out of their deck. So when I boarded, I brought in the Duress, the Liliana Spectre, the Hypnotic Spectre, the Mesmeric Fiend, or not the Mesmeric Fiend, the Brain Maggot, I think is what it's called. It's a very similar card, though. So when I see a hand of just 2 lands, but with the ability to cast an Inquisition, I opt to keep it because I think it's going to be strong against them. I Inquisition away the Sylvan Caryatid to take away the one viable card they can actually play in their hand if they don't hit lands. And then the following turn, I draw Duress and Duress away the Cultivate. They fail to hit lands, which kind of lends credence to this line of play. Not because it was successful, because I think it was right to do this, put him in a position like this. What we're looking to do is just set lands on top. We put the Phantasmal Image, I believe, on bottom, and then we Thoughtseize them, getting rid of their Sarkhan, the Dragon Speaker, which is the most aggressive of the Planeswalker threats they have in hand. They play out an Alesha, which they drew off the top. We kill it, which is interesting because we could have just saved that for Planeswalker. But I didn't want to risk, them getting value off it, getting their Sylvan Caryatid back. We get rid of the Outpost Siege, so I don't want them to be on more cards than me. They do end up getting our Liliana with a Maelstrom Pulse. They also top decked as well. We play on our Jace at this point in time and plus him because what we're kind of look to do if they don't hit mana is use the ultimate. So they play on an Oracle and we know that we can't probably sit back. We got to use our Liliana and get rid of this thing, and we got to start drawing because their draw is getting close to actually being able to cast things. But we have to negate. We feel pretty fortunate about that. I do get rid of the Bloodgift Demon because I want to be able to just cast my counter magic and blink away. Although it could have been wrong because, correction, it's not wrong because they have a lot of removal in deck, but not relevant threats that they can play right now. And I'm a relatively threat-light deck. So we actually find an optimal threat there in the Creeping Tar Pit that we can protect with our counter magic as well as Planeswalkers. We continue to blink away with our 1/1. And here they attempt to cast a Devil's Play, targeting one of our Planeswalkers, more than likely. Well, targeting us, but likely trying to hit one of our Planeswalkers. We go ahead and negate it, because we know we have Cryptic Command and Dissolve and Venser available to us. And continue to draw cards with Jace so that we can use our Liliana, but stay on card parity while we knock their hand apart. We've got them down to 1 card, 12 life. Don't have a huge threat in play, but they see the writing on the wall, and they go ahead and concede it. So, interesting game. This game's actually very interactive. So we start off with a hand that cannot cast the Bitter Blossom. However, it does have a Serum Visions, which can set the top deck up to find black mana, which we do. We also find a Liliana the Veil, which is a strong one. I believe we put both on top because we just want to hit lands with this hand. Again, kind of similar to one of the last matches we talked about. They do Maelstrom Pulse that. I figure that Silumgar is going to be very good in this matchup because they have a lot of pretty good creatures and Planeswalkers. Now, I figure they're capped on mana at this point. I do keep the Thoughtseize so I get their most relevant threat, which I end up taking. What I end up taking is actually the Dreadbore. I'm fine with this card because I have the Essence Scatter already available to me, and I kind of want them to, if I continue to hit lands, I kind of want them to cast their Garruk Primal Hunter. I do not here. So what is interesting is they do, and they try to cast it out this next turn. We end up negating it here because I don't want them just to make a free beast, and if I don't hit a land, it's catastrophic if I don't get the thing right now, right? I believe I do hit a land though, which I'm fairly favored to do, but I don't want to risk not hitting it and what I'm talking about is use of the Silumgar. That would have been an awesome card to take with Silumgar. I get rid of the other Liliana and just start ripping their hand apart. And continue ripping their hand apart, as well as my own, but I'm going to keep this Silumgar. I go ahead and split their piles such that the Pack Rat pile is favorable. Then I end up stealing the Pack Rat because I can start making rats with it. They draw pretty well and find Pitiless Hordes. They can at least block. They block there. I discard both my cards to start making rats. So the actual card I took from them is now gone. They find a Siege Rhino. It's whatever, you know. I just pick up a swamp here, and I discard the swamp. Want to see if there's anything good up there, but there really wasn't. I just start making rats. They find a Fleece Mane. I find a Worm Coil Engine. Attack them for 3 more down to 10, and then I have lethal on the following turn. They do not draw it off the top deck, and that is the game. So a pretty interesting series of games, and just kind of interesting promo for the MTGO Modern Cube. I actually had a very fun time doing it. I wasn't quite sold on the cube or sure on it, just looking through the list. I do still think there are some suboptimals in the list. But, you know, and then again, it's kind of how you try some new cards out. But there are some less impressive ones. We just managed to get very lucky and draw extremely good, I think mostly extremely good cards. I mean, yeah, you have Essence Scatter, which is kind of like a meh counterspell, but it's fine in cube, and you have to assume there's a lot of creatures. But otherwise, the deck was, I think, pretty good. Pretty good. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you're on the verge about trying out the Modern Cube in the next 3 or 4 days, I recommend you do it at least once. Give it a shot. This is my first time. I don't know if I'll do it again, but I definitely had a fun time doing it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and take care.